Real quickly, we were talking about the equilibrium in a competitive market and using the idea of marginal benefit and marginal cost to see like why market forces lead us to equilibrium, what happens when we're not in equilibrium. Like I said, there's also another way to think of it. We could look at it through economic surplus, like we talked about this chapter so far. So economic surplus is the sum of the consumer and the producer's surplus. So in your typical free market, a competitive one with many buyers and sellers, few government restrictions besides setting the rules of the game. Your economic surplus is at a maximum when the market is in equilibrium. So looking at this market right here, we'll just use this supply and demand. At the $2 price right here, the consumer surplus is going to be above that right here. And then the producer surplus is going to be below that. So right there. So your total economic surplus is just going to be the sum of these two areas. Okay, so the same way we looked at like what happens when the market's out of equilibrium, we'll do that again for consumer and producer surplus. And I'll just draw a new one so it's a lot easier to tell what's going on. Now we have our equilibrium price, which again will make 15 or equal quantity 15,000, and the equilibrium price of $2. And again, this is consumer surplus, and that's producer surplus. So right now we've got those two areas maximized because we're at the equilibrium point. So let's see what happens when the price is $2.20. So at 220 up here, that puts us at these 2 points. Only 14,000 are sold. That's all that people are willing and able to buy at that price. But 16,000 are made. In this case, the consumer surplus is above the price at which it's sold. So it's this area right in here. The producer surplus is this area right here, which used to be consumer surplus, and then this producer surplus area. Now it's all this. And then this part, this used to be consumer surplus, this was producer surplus. That's dead weight loss. That's entirely lost to the economy because these transactions don't take place. Only 14,000 are bought instead of 15,000. So you can say the total economic surplus in this case, instead of being this whole area, like this market that's in equilibrium, right here it's this area going up to here. This section right there is completely lost. So think of that as the loss of value from the quantity being sold, going to 14,000 from 15,000 because the price is being set too high. So the term that we use for that loss to society that we get in this situation is called a dead weight loss. No one gains these, even though producer surplus, like the producers did gain like this little piece right in here, they still lost that chunk, and consumers lost an additional chunk. That never comes back. So if we get the opposite situation where the price was too low, you'd see basically the mirror image of this happen. You would see consumers gain a chunk of the producer surplus, and then you would see the dead weight loss, like that same triangle, occur. And again, we would be worse off. So the economic surplus is the sum of both consumer surplus and producer surplus. That is the best measure to estimate the value to society of a particular good and service. And it's the second way of characterizing economic efficiency in a competitive market. Equilibrium in a competitive market results in the greatest amount of economic surplus. Think of that as like the total net benefit to society from the production of a good or service. Anything that causes the market to not be in equilibrium reduces the total benefit to society. So whether it's being caused by a government regulation, by producers not being able to produce the goods cheaply enough to satisfy people's demands, or not knowing what people want, if it's people not having trust in companies to provide quality products, or to not just like completely rip them off, these things are going to reduce the total value of an economy. And this is why entrepreneurs are so important, as we talked about earlier. When there's a lack of knowledge that leaves the economy in disequilibrium, or like a problem that people face, entrepreneurs' actions satisfy the consumer's wants and needs and moves us closer towards equilibrium. We think of it as taking small steps, moving us to a better world, and making society better off. So a general definition for economic efficiency is a market outcome in which the marginal benefit to consumers of the last unit produced of a good or service is equal to the marginal cost of production, and in which the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus is at a maximum. Okay, so that brings us to the end of consumer and producer surplus. Do you guys have any questions about that? Whether some from last class or from this class? All right. So next section of the book is government interventions. So it's like so far with economic efficiency, we've said that society is better off when it's in equilibrium, but that's not true for every single individual. The total net benefit may be maximized at equilibrium, but individuals can always make themselves better off. In this case, it'll be at the expense of someone else. It's an idea from the Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto. Idea that no one can be made better off without making somebody else worse off when you're in equilibrium. So imagine me right now robbing Jenna, taking her cell phone. Obviously, that makes me better off because I have a cell phone. Maybe I could sell it, or I got a second one to play with, whatever. That obviously makes her worse off. She's now unable to communicate, and she's out, a couple $100. You think about it, sellers would prefer to sell their goods at higher prices. They'd always prefer to make more profit. And consumers would always like to pay less for a good and to have more money to spend on other stuff. So say SFU offers me a 10% raise right now. I may be happy with the amount of money I make, but I'm always willing to take more. So I'd jump all over that. Likewise, I'm sure you guys would love to pay less in tuition. And you'd think raising tuition every year, they could afford like one more snowplow?
Or like smarter people.
No, I'm confused by them.
They plow the sidewalks and then they plow the roads and all the snow goes up on the sidewalk. I'm like, maybe
They
you guys
do
need
opposite
an
order.
education to get hired for the
Are we in debt?
I have no idea how the school finances
School
work.
isn't a lot of debt.
Luckily, I'm not actually paid by the school. I'm
Probably
paid
because
through
they mow the
the
grass
research center.
every 2 days in the summer. Or
Shit.
before.
Hey, the place looks nice in the summer.
It does.
I like 2 months a year when there's like flowers and stuff blooming,
Yeah.
shit like that.
Stuff like that.
This school will be done in years.
10 years?
Jesus
I
Christ.
give it 10 years from this stuff.
Closed in 10 years?
Well, as long as it's after I graduate, I don't care.
Yeah.
Why?
Hmm?
Why?
The only thing keeping them alive is people in athletics.
Yeah. He's right.
There's a number of small schools like us that are like closing down or close to closing down at this point. That's like a serious problem the school's been trying to deal with. Well, there's like fewer young people to like go to college.
If the department start doing crappy, then
I
bye.
think when the alumni get tired of donating all this money, they're gonna be like, great.
We're doing all these renovations and borrowing money and enrollment's going down. I don't think it's looking good.
Enrollment's going down like everywhere. So they're competing over a smaller market. So they're just trying to do whatever they can to get more students to come here.
Well, and they
Raising tuition there.
have ways of like screwing people out of money too. Like you can't live off campus because all your institutions make it stupid.
Yeah.
Wait, why is
Like
it
no
more
other
expensive?
college I
Yeah,
can think
if
of.
you're an
that-
athlete, you're not allowed to have a place off campus if you're on a scholarship.
Yeah, it's their way to keep you under their thumb.
Well, you can get around it, you just need to pay out of pocket.
Yeah. It's got that kind of money.
Well, we also get plus attendance. So like,
Anyway, we can spend like the rest of the class talking about what's going on with the school. So judging by the title of the section, government interventions, you can guess that through government, groups of individuals or firms are able to get around equilibrium, try to make themselves better off. So sometimes government will legally require a certain price to be charged. They'll use price controls to say either you must set at this certain price or it has to be above or below this price. Yeah, so one example is a price floor. Firms cannot sell lower than their price floor. And it's supposed to be set above equilibrium for it to, actually have an effect. And there's also price ceilings that firms cannot sell above a certain price. And it's supposed to be set again below equilibrium so that it actually has an effect. So let's start by looking at a price floor. In price floors, sellers are legally prevented from selling a good or a service below a specified price. And this is done in theory to protect consumers. So it's like consumer groups lobbying the government to pass these laws. I'll draw an example for agriculture because that's price floors we've had since the Great Depression. So let's say the equilibrium price here for wheat is at $6.50. And we'll say the quantity is like 2 billion bushels. So then after successfully lobbying, because small farmers are the backbone of America, even though there's like no small farmers left anymore, the government sets the minimum price to be sold for wheat at $8. Here at $8, we'll draw a line across. So initially, like I said, there's 2 billion bushels sold. After the price floor is put in place, there's only 1.8 billion bushels sold. But because farmers are getting a higher price for the wheat they're producing, they're going to make 2.2 billion bushels of wheat. So here we've got a surplus. We've got 0.4 billion extra bushels of wheat laying around that people aren't going to buy because the price is too high for them. So in this case, what do we do? What's the solution? What we normally do in ag policy is the government buys the wheat. They pay for farmers to let their fields lay fallow, so they don't grow anything. Or they'll even pay to buy the wheat and then destroy it instead of giving it out. In the Great Depression, they were trying to prop up the price of pigs, so they bought a whole bunch of hogs from farmers and they just slaughtered them and let the bodies rot. Meanwhile, people were standing in bread line for days trying to get food. So it wasn't exactly the most well thought out policy. Like I said, these price controls have been in place since the Great Depression. In 1996, the federal government passed a law giving farmers subsidies, and they were going to phase out the price controls so that we could have a market price to determine what we sell wheat at. And then the subsidies were supposed to phase out, and then we'd go back to a regular market. But unsurprisingly, this bill's been renewed every single year, so farmers are still getting these subsidies. And we'll talk about why that's the case later. But basically, once they're making money, they're going to keep lobbying and trying to get the government to keep passing the bills to keep the subsidies coming for them. And obviously, people act in their own self-interest. if there's money to be made, they're going to try to make it. So looking at this, obviously above this line of 650 right there, that was previously consumer surplus. Now, the section marked A right here, above the old price and below the new price, that's been captured by consumers. Wait, I'm sorry, that's been captured by producers. Now the farmers get that surplus value from the price they're selling the wheat at. B and C, like we talked about before, these are both dead weight losses. Because we're not selling 2 billion bushels, we're only selling 1.8 billion bushels in this economy. People are made worse off, so we're going to lose that value. So basically what we're saying is that the farmers in this case, they're benefiting at the expense of consumers by getting these price controls passed. So obviously we now have this surplus of wheat, the difference between this point right here this point here and this point there. And this is going to reduce economic efficiency. Resources that could be devoted to other things, things like hemp, flowers, maybe other crops, they're going to be devoted to wheat that people don't want, and the government's going to have to buy the surplus or let it lay fallow and rot. So now the farmers are going to produce, too much wheat, so to speak, too much to be efficient. So the marginal benefit of producing the last bushel of wheat, going back to the previous section, marginal benefit of producing the last bushel of wheat is going to be greater than the marginal cost of producing it. Again, this is inefficient. Yeah, the initial consumer surplus was A, B, and this area up here. Now it's just that small area up here. B and C are totally lost. A, and then this area, which was most of the producer surplus, is now producer surplus. So there's another example, something more common in the news right now, especially from the past couple months, is minimum wage. If we think of the labor market like a typical market, we can see how the minimum wage acts as a price floor. So in this case, workers they're like the firms, they're the producers that they sell their labor. So they create the supply. And firms are consumers because they pay workers. They pay them for their labor. So that's the demand. So let's look at the effect of the fight for 15. Here's our supply curve, which is the workers. The demand curve, which is firms. Say that, 10,000 in this market. And let's say the wage you're making per hour is $10. So now let's say they make the minimum wage $15. They get that right off the bat, and that's where they're going to set the wages. So the demand is maybe only 8,000, but the supply is 12,000. So the artificially high wages that are being offered because of the minimum wage law here results in the lower quantity demanded here. So firms are only wanting 8,000 employees at the $15 an hour wage. But in this case, more people are willing to work. 12,000 people are willing to work instead of 10,000. And that's obvious. The more money you're going to make, the more you're going to be willing to work. If someone really doesn't want to work, but they're offered a bunch of money, they'll re-enter the labor market. I mean, I work at Burger King for $150,000 a year flipping burgers if they'll pay me $150K. but obviously I'm not going to take it if they're offering a normal salary. So more people are going to be willing to take these jobs. Maybe it's like being a janitor at a bar, not really the greatest job out there, like having to go in the basement and kill rats, dealing with drunk patrons. But if they're going at $10 an hour, it's like I wouldn't do that. But at $15 an hour, I think, maybe that's decent money. I could do that. So people find these lower skill jobs more appealing when they're making more money. And remember that the marginal cost equals a marginal benefit when we're in equilibrium. So wages reflect the marginal productivity of the workers to the firms. Firms are willing and able to pay workers, so they're unwilling and unable to pay workers more than they produce for the firm. Obviously, that's going to go against their bottom line if they're paying people too high wages compared to what they're bringing into the company. So in this case, the number of workers that are hired are going to fall from 10,000 to 8,000. So obviously, the people that lose their job, those 2,000 fewer people, they're going to suffer from this. They're going to be made worse off. But those 8,000 people that still had jobs are now better off because they're making $15 an hour. So when economists study minimum wage laws, they usually find that that an increase in the minimum wage increases the unemployment rate. A few years ago, probably like 20 years ago now, these two economists, Card and Kruger, did a study on New Jersey raising their minimum wage law and compared it against Eastern Pennsylvania. And they found the exact opposite. They found an increase in employment. James Buchanan called it like finding water running uphill, that the outcome doesn't make sense. And in general, when you do minimum wage studies, there's some serious problems. So the main problem is the data. Can you guys imagine what any data problems they would have with trying to figure this out? So obviously they don't have there's no database of every single person out there and what their salaries are and everything. It just doesn't exist. So they do surveys every so often. Well, usually once a year the census does of 1 or 2% of the population. So they try to use that to get wage data, but it's not perfectly detailed. People still do have some sort of privacy. So they can't just get every single person that makes minimum wage and then study a before and after. So they try to use an approximation for it. So they look at fast food workers under 22. The problem is a lot of them don't make minimum wage. A bunch of them are above it. So they might not be affected by it. So you get these really, really poor estimations. We don't have the perfect population to study. But then there are other possibilities that firms, in this case, in this supply and demand, they hire fewer people because they have higher labor costs. But there's other ways to reduce labor costs. So they could save on other margins. Maybe they reduce people's hours. Instead of everyone working 40 hours a week, they're only working 35 hours a week. They might give employees fewer perks. Maybe in the past they gave them every time you come into work you can get a free meal. Maybe they get rid of that. That's not counted in their wages, but that's an employment cost. They might just eat the cost up front and then give fewer raises in the future that they were planning on doing. They could reduce benefits. I don't know too many minimum wage jobs that give really good healthcare or 401k stuff, but maybe they offered a little bit of that kind of stuff. They're going to get rid of it either completely or less, just so they could save money. And they may reduce future hiring. So they know they may need more employees in the future. They're just not going to hire new ones then. They'll stick with what they have now. So this causes dead weight loss like we saw before. That this area right here, which was consumer surplus, is now captured by the producers or the people working. So all this now is producer surplus or worker surplus. These two areas right here are dead weight loss. They're completely lost in the economy because we have fewer people working. And one of the long run effects of raising minimum wage is obviously you're reducing the number of low skilled workers in the economy. That prevents more people from getting jobs and building the skills they need to leave poverty. When you apply for a job, the first thing like they want to know is, well, what previous jobs have you had? And by missing like the first rung on the ladder, so to speak, your first job, it's going to make it makes it more difficult for people to gain the experience to be able to get a job in the future. So basically, you're hurting job opportunities in the long run to help people with jobs in the present. So, you're facing a trade-off between two time periods, between now and later. So in my opinion, again, this is completely a normative judgment. For those reasons, the minimum wage is bad. There are better ways to help low-income earners reach a higher standard of living, which is the sort of goal with minimum wage. Maybe some people believe that there are serious negatives of minimum wages, but in the end, getting those people from $10, $15 an hour, that's more important, and it makes us a lot better off than people staying at $10 an hour, more people working, building up their skills, and getting better jobs later. That's a normal judgment for you to make if you weigh the costs and the benefits and you determine what's more important. Okay, so now, are there any questions about price? Price floors? Okay, how much time do we have? All right. So, have you guys been paying attention to the Amazon headquarters thing? About the stories they now backed out in New York City. They spent 6 months getting proposals from all these cities, what kind of tax breaks you give us, what kind of deal are you going to give us to move our headquarters there. And they picked one in Arlington, in Crystal City, right outside of DC, and the other in I want to say Long Island, somewhere in New York City. Have you guys been following this lately? Or they just blew up that they're leaving New York City? Okay, well, regardless of that, I'm curious what your guys' opinion was on Amazon getting these tax breaks and sweetheart deals to move to build a new headquarters in these cities. Or do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? Good thing that they're offering the deal, the cities are offering deals, or good thing that they're not going to New York?
They're offering deals.
Why is that?
Just because, like I said, there's other reasons for them to do it. They didn't do it, it's good for them. And for us too.
Well, what reason do you think that is, though?
Just make more money, I don't know. Isn't that what everything is like? Just make more money.
That you think the local communities, so New York and Crystal City, are going to make more money? The local economies are going to do better because they've got an Amazon location there. You don't think so?
It'll bring new workers there, probably younger people that want to work for Amazon. It'll bring them in that area.
So you think that's a net positive?
Stimulate them to do it.
Yeah, probably not positive. I mean,
That's what New York was really concerned about, or one of their concerns was the higher cost of real estate. People being priced out of the area because of all these new people coming. Because it's high paying jobs. These aren't warehouse jobs.
They don't want Amazon right there.
You know what?
They don't want Amazon there in New York, right?
Yeah. I mean, Nashville puts together an offer. They were moving to Nashville. It's interesting because
You're putting cowboy hat for this.
that'd be a good advertising thing down there. But two of the things about New York and DC is they're New York is connected to international markets, and DC is connected to national politicians. Both of them are very high skilled, highly educated workforces, and people want to move there. And Amazon picked those. Those are if you look at those are the things Amazon was looking for, and those two cities were the best choice for it. But do you think they really needed to put together those tax incentives?
They didn't need them, but I mean, if they have that leverage, that they're bring new workers there, why not take advantage of it?
So you think it's good for business because, hey, they want Amazon anyway. They might as
I think
well.
he's a smart guy for doing that.
Oh yeah.
I'm not necessarily agreeing that it's the right thing for him to do.
I'm not saying morally, but just like
Yeah.
for the bottom line of his company, it's,
Yeah, it makes sense that he would do that.
yeah. And it's like we talked about earlier about like people lobbying the government to try to get benefits. Like that's what Bezos was doing. That they've, I don't know, their taxes in New York are super high. So he negotiated a deal to get like $3 billion off of like the $5 billion he would owe the first year. He's like, hey, you're getting all this stimulating the economy, new people moving there. You're still getting $2 billion. But do you think New York's better off chasing them out?
I don't think it will be a positive thing because the government can profit about this, and even the business around can profit that much because, and I think this is the reason why they don't want Amazon there.
Anyone else? I really thought there was gonna be like strong opinions about Amazon, hating them and liking them.
You can do whatever you want out here.
And like South Park this year, everyone loves Amazon when they're the consumer, but when they're like competing against Amazon, they hate it. You guys at least see that? Like the last 2 episodes of South Park this season. They did like a thing where like the Amazon like workers like in the warehouse and stuff are like coal miners. They would buy from the company store. It was back like in like the coal town, especially like, you know, eastern Pennsylvania, like the coal company owned everything. They owned like the school, they owned the general store where you shop. Like everything you did was from the coal company. And they're saying like Amazon's like the same thing, so you get everything from Amazon. I thought it was an interesting critique and it was really funny. And one guy gets like packaged up in like an industrial accident. And like they put all his body in like Amazon box, and the Amazon box was talking and like leading like a Marxist like revolution against Amazon.
I think they're starting to develop a monopoly just because they would have with cheap prices. I mean, there's competition, but the prices whatsoever, so I think they're a monopoly. Because then the consumer is interested in
Do you know what their market share is? Like how much of online retailing they have?
probably 85%.
Does anyone know?
60%.
It's 60%?
Really? I think so.
That's a lot. But one interesting thing about Amazon, like probably preventing them from being a monopoly, is that is they have a ton of third-party sellers on there. So in a way, it's like eBay, but it's still through Amazon. So Amazon, their algorithms decide what you see. So it's a weird like quasi-monopoly. What are you selling me homemade goods?
No, like self-made.
Oh, so you're gonna be stealing them somehow.
No, I own a self-made garage bar, so I got that something.
All right. Any last comments about Amazon? I really love people who either like or hate Amazon. Oh my god, yeah, it's way cheaper.
$30.
They're not-
$240.
In this case, they're like the opposite of Monopoly. My first semester, I bought all my textbooks at the bookstore. And then the next semester, I went on Amazon and saved like 50%. Like $300 was awesome. Okay, so well, today's Thursday, which is like Friday in academia. So we'll end class early. I went on campus and like did some stuff. So there's like grades, and you get your assignments on there. Pull up on stuff next Thursday. The first assignment, like the real world assignments due. If you have any questions about it, you feel free to email me or come to my office to see like, I don't know if what you're doing, if the article's like good fit, or if like what you're doing makes sense, something like that. A lot of you talked about in the evaluation thing or the suggestion thing, talked about using PowerPoints. So starting next class, I didn't have time yesterday to do it, but starting next class, I'm gonna try to use the PowerPoints. I have the textbook PowerPoints on Canvas, so you can follow along in class on your own, but I'll try doing it in class. So you guys can see, like up there, what's going on.